The Saga of Halfdan the Black. Preliminary remarks. Of this saga, there are other versions found in Heimskringla and in Flateyjarbók. In the Flateyjarbók version is to a great extent a copy of Snorri. The story about Halfdan's dream is found both in Heimskringla and in Flateyjarbók. The probability is that both Snorri and the author of Heimskringla must have transcribed the original text. 1. Halfdan fights with Gandalf and Sigtryg. Halfdan was a year old when his father was killed, and his mother Asa set off immediately with him westward to Agder, and set herself there in the kingdom which her father Harold had possessed. Halfdan grew up there, and soon became stout and strong, and, by reason of his black hair, was called Halfdan the Black. When he was 18 years old, he took his kingdom in Agder, and went immediately to Vestfold, where he divided that kingdom, as before related, with his brother Olaf. The same autumn, he went with an army to Vingelmark against King Gandalf. They had many battles, and sometimes one, sometimes the other gained the victory. But at last they agreed that Halfdan should have half of Vingelmark, as his father Gudrod had before him. Then King Halfdan proceeded to Raumariki and subdued it. King Sigtryg, son of King Eystein, who then had his residence in Hedemark, and who had subdued Raumariki before, having heard of this, came out with his army against King Halfdan, and there was a great battle, in which King Halfdan was victorious. And just as King Sigtryg and his troops were running about to fly, an arrow struck him under the left arm, and he fell dead. Halfdan then laid the whole of Raumariki under his power. King Eystein's second son, King Sigtryg's brother, was also called Eystein, and was then king in Hedemark. As soon as Halfdan had returned to Vestfold, King Eystein went out with his army to Raumariki, and laid the whole country in subjection to him. 2. Battle between Halfdan and Eystein. When King Halfdan heard of these disturbances in Raumariki, he again gathered his army together and went out against King Eystein. A battle took place between them, and Halfdan gained the victory, and Eystein fled up to Hedemark, pursued by Halfdan. Another battle took place, in which Halfdan was again victorious, and Eystein fled northwards, up into the dales, to the Hers Gudbrand. There he was strengthened with new people, and in winter he went towards Hedemark, and met Halfdan the Black upon a large island which lies in the Mjosen Lake. There a great battle was fought, and many people on both sides were slain, but Halfdan won the victory. There fell Guthorm, the son of Hers Gudbrand, who was one of the finest men in the uplands. Then Eystein fled north up the valley and sent his relation Halvard Skalk to King Halfdan to beg for peace. On consideration of their relationship, King Halfdan gave King Eystein half of Hedemark, which he and his relations had held before, but kept to himself Thoten, and the district called Land. He likewise appropriated to himself Hedeland, and thus became a mighty king. 3. Halfdan's marriage. Halfdan the Black got a wife called Ragnhild, a daughter of Harald Goldbeard, who was a king in Sogn. They had a son, to whom Harald gave his own name, and the boy was brought up in Sogn by his mother's father, King Harald. Now, when this Harald had lived out his days nearly, and was become weak, having no son, he gave his dominions to his daughter's son Harald, and gave him his title of king, and he died soon after. The same winter, his daughter Ragnhild died, and the following spring the young Harald fell sick and died at 10 years of age. As soon as Halfdan the Black heard of his son's death, he took to the road northward to Sogn with a great force, and was well received. He claimed the heritage and dominion after his son, and no opposition being made, he took the whole kingdom. Earl Atle Mjova, the Slender, who was a friend of King Halfdan, came to him from Galar, and the king set him over the Sogn district, to judge in the country according to the country's laws, and collect scat upon the king's account. Thereafter, King Halfdan proceeded to his kingdom in the uplands. 4. Halfdan's strife with Gandalf's sons. In autumn, King Halfdan proceeded to Vingelmark. One night, when he was there in guest quarters, it happened that about midnight a man came to him who had been on the watch on horseback, and told him a war force was come near to the house. The king instantly got up, ordered his men to arm themselves, and went out of the house and drew them up in battle order. At the same moment, Gandalf's sons, Heising and Helsing, made their appearance with a large army. There was a great battle, but Halfdan, being overpowered by the numbers of people, fled to the forest, leaving many of his men on this spot. His foster father, Olver Spake the Wise, fell here. The people now came in swarms to King Halfdan, and he advanced to seek Gandalf's sons. They met at Aid, near Lake Orion, and fought there. Heising and Helsing fell, and their brother Haki saved himself by flight. King Halfdan then took possession of the whole of Vingelmark, and Hake fled to Alfheimar. 5. Halfdan's marriage with Hjort's daughter. Sigurd Hjort was the name of a king in Ringerike, who was stouter and stronger than any other man, and his equal could not be seen for a handsome appearance. His father was Helga Vasa the Sharp, and his mother was Auslaug, a daughter of Sigurd the Worm-Eyed, who again was a son of Ragnar Lothbrok. It is told of Sigurd that when he was only 12 years old, he killed in single combat the berserk Hildebrand and 11 others of his comrades, and many are the deeds of manhood told of him in a long saga about his feats. Sigurd had 2 children, one of whom was a daughter called Ragnhild, the 20 years of age, and an excellent brisk girl. Her brother Guthorm was a youth. It is related in regard to Sigurd's death that he had a custom of riding out quite alone in uninhabited forest to hunt the wild beasts that are hurtful to man, and he was always very eager at this sport. One day, he rode out into the forest as usual, and when he had ridden a long way, he came out at a piece of cleared land near to Hedeland. There the berserk Hake came against him, with 30 men, and they fought. Sigurd Hjort fell there, after killing 12 of Hake's men, and Hake himself lost one hand, and he had 3 other wounds. Then Hake and his men rode to Sigurd's house, where they took his daughter Ragnhild and her brother Guthorm, and carried them, with much property and valuable articles, home to Hedeland, where Hake had many great farms. He ordered a feast to be prepared, intending to hold his wedding with Ragnhild, but the time passed on account of his wounds, which healed slowly, and the berserker Hake of Hedeland had to keep his bed on account of his wounds all the autumn and beginning of winter. Now, King Halfdan was in Hedemark at the Yule entertainments when he heard this news, and one morning early, when the king was dressed, he called to him Herikgand, and told him to go over to Hedeland and bring him Ragnhild, Sigurd Hjorth's daughter. Herrick got ready with 100 men, and made his journey so that they came over the lake to Hake's house in the grey of the morning, and beset all the doors and stairs of the place where the house servants slept. Then they broke into the sleeping room where Hake slept, took Ragnhild, with her brother Guthorm, and all the goods that were there, and set fire to the house servant's place, and burnt all the people in it. Then they covered over a magnificent wagon, placed Ragnhild and Guthorm in it, and drove down upon the ice. Hake got up and went after them a while, but when he came to the ice on the lake, he turned his sword hilt to the ground and let himself fall upon the point, so that the sword went through him. He was buried under a mound on the banks of the lake. When King Halfdan, who was very quick of sight, saw the party returning over the frozen lake, and with a covered wagon, he knew that their errand was accomplished according to his desire. Thereupon, he ordered the tables to be set out, and sent people all round in the neighborhood to invite plenty of guests, and the same day there was a good feast, which was also Halfdan's marriage feast with Ragnhild, who became a great queen. Ragnhild's mother was Thorny, a daughter of Clockharald, king in Jutland, and a sister of Thry Danabode, who was married to the Danish king, Gorm the Old, who then ruled over the Danish dominions. 6. Of Ragnhild's dream. Ragnhild, who was wise and intelligent, dreamt great dreams. She dreamt, for one, that she was standing out in her herb garden, and she took a thorn out of her shift, but while she was holding the thorn in her hand, it grew so that it became a great tree, one end of which struck itself down into the earth, and it became firmly rooted. And the other end of the tree raised itself so high in the air that she could scarcely see over it, and it became also wonderfully thick. The under part of the tree was red with blood, but the stem upwards was beautifully green, and the branches white as snow. There were many and great limbs to this tree, some high up, others low down, and so vast were the tree's branches that they seemed to her to cover all Norway, and even much more. 7. Of Halfdan's Dream. King Halfdan never had dreams, which appeared to him an extraordinary circumstance, and he told it to a man called Thorleif Spake the Wise, and asked him what his advice was about it. Thorleif said that what he himself did when he wanted to have any revelation by dream was to take his sleep in a swine sty, and then it never failed that he had dreams. The king did so, and the following dream was revealed to him. He thought he had the most beautiful hair, which was all in ringlets, some so long as to fall upon the ground, some reaching the middle of his legs, some to his knees, some to his loins or the middle of his sides, some to his neck, and some were only as knots springing from his head. These ringlets were of various colors, but one ringlet surpassed all the others in beauty, luster, and size. This dream he told to Thorleif, who interpreted it thus: there should be a great posterity from him, and his descendants should rule over countries with great, but not all with equally great, honor. But one of his race should be more celebrated than all the others. It was the opinion of the people that this ringlet betokened King Olaf the Saint. King Halfdan was a wise man, a man of truth and uprightness, who made laws, observed them, and obliged others to observe them. And that violence should not come in place of the laws, he himself fixed the number of criminal acts in law, and the compensations, mulcts, or penalties for each case according to everyone's birth and dignity. Queen Ragnhild gave birth to a son, and water was poured over him, and the name of Harold given him, and he soon grew stout and remarkably handsome. As he grew up, he became very expert at all feats, and showed also a good understanding. He was much beloved by his mother, but less so by his father. Here we have a footnote in regards to the penalties for each case according to each one's birth and dignity. The penalty, compensation, or man bod for every injury, due the party injured, or to his family and next of kin if the injury was the death or premeditated murder of the party, appears to have been fixed for every rank and condition, from the murder of the king down to the maiming or beating a man's cattle or his slave. A man for whom no compensation was due was a dishonored person or an outlaw. It appears to have been optional with the injured party, or his kin if he had been killed, to take the mulct or compensation, or to refuse it and wait for an opportunity of taking vengeance for the injury on the party who inflicted it, or on his kin. A part of each mulct or compensation was due to the king, and these fines or penalties appear to have been constituted a great portion of the king's revenues, and to have been settled in the things held in every district for administering the law with the lagman. 8. Halfdan's meat vanishes at a feast. King Halfdan was at a Yule feast in Hadeland, where a wonderful thing happened one Yule evening. When the great number of guests assembled were going to sit down to the table, all the meat and all the ale disappeared from the table. The king sat alone, very confused in mind. All the others set off, each to his own home, in consternation. That the king might come to some certainty about what had occasioned this event, he ordered a Finn to be seized, who was particularly knowing, and tried to force him to disclose the truth, but however much he tortured the man, he got nothing out of him. The Finn sought help particularly from Harold, the king's son, and Harold begged for mercy for him, but in vain. Then Harold let him escape against the king's will and accompanied the man himself. On their journey, they came to a place where the man's chief had a great feast, and it appears they were well received there. When they had been there until the spring, the chief said, "Thy father took it much amiss that in winter I took some provisions from him. Now I will repay it to thee with a joyful piece of news. Thy father is dead, and now thou shalt return home and take possession of the whole kingdom which he had, and with it thou shalt lay the whole kingdom of Norway under thee." 9. Halfdan's death. Halfdan the Black was driving home from a feast in Hadeland, and it so happened that his road lay over the lake called Rand. It was in spring, and there was a great thaw. They drove across the bight called Rickensvik, where in winter there had been a pond broken in the ice for cattle to drink at, and where the dung had fallen upon the ice, the thaw had eaten it into holes. Now, as the king drove over it, the ice broke, and King Halfdan and many with him perished. He was then 40 years old. He had been one of the most fortunate kings in respect of good seasons. The people thought so much of him that when his death was known and his body was floated to Ringerike to bury it there, the people of most consequence from Raumarike, Vestfold, and Hedemark came to meet it. All desired to take the body with them to bury it in their own district, and they thought that those who got it would have good crops to expect. At last it was agreed to divide his body into 4 parts. The head was laid in a mound at Stein in Ringerike, and each of the others took his part home and laid it in a mound. And these have since been called Halfdan's mounds.